Now that is some beautiful compost. Let's talk about composting, but not the complicated, rule-heavy type of composting. What I like to call lazy composting. Composting where you can largely ignore it and still get really good compost. At its core, composting is just allowing organic material to break down into nutrient-rich soil that is great for your garden. And the composting experts will tell you that there's a science to it. And yes, there really is a science to it, but you don't have to follow all the rules to get good compost. But before I tell you all the different ways that you can lazy compost, I think it's important for me to tell you some of those stricter rules that my wife and I followed when we were compost coordinators at a local community garden. The ideal compost pile has the right balance of carbon, which are browns like leaves, wood chips, and paper, and nitrogen, greens like food scraps, grass clippings, and manure. It's recommended that compost have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 30:1. It should also stay moist and get turned now and then for aeration. Traditional composting is aerobic, meaning that it relies on oxygen to break down organic materials efficiently. Aerobic composting produces heat, speeds up decomposition, and reduces odors, creating nutrient-rich compost. Ideally, compost should reach a temperature between 130 degrees Fahrenheit and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that's the ideal scenario, but you can ignore like half of that and still be fine. Now, as promised, lazy composting. The first way of lazy composting or method that you can use is getting a whole bunch of arborist chips for free and letting them sit. Now, in creating a lot of my gardens, I've been using wood chips, and we got several piles of wood chips when we first moved in, actually 11 truckloads. And a lot of it, well, I never got around to really using, and it's just been sitting here. But in that time, it has broken down into beautiful, rich compost. Now this compost right here, because it was just wood chips, it's probably going to be lacking a great nutrient balance for blending into your soil, but it would be a great top dressing, which is how a lot of no-till gardeners actually use compost rather than incorporating it, using it as a mulch. So this would be great, but let me show you how you can make it even better. Remember how I said that compost needs a ratio of carbon to nitrogen of 30:1? Well, your wood chips are going to be heavy in carbon. Well, you can add nitrogen. This pile right here, which is very well broken down, and I mean, now that is some beautiful compost. Look at that. I didn't do anything with this other than piling up wood chips, but I added a source of nitrogen. The source of nitrogen that I used were alfalfa pellets. You can get a big, like 50 pound bag of alfalfa pellets usually for feeding horses for 20 bucks. So I incorporated that with the wood chips to make some great, beautiful compost. Now, originally I piled it up to about here, and it slowly broke down. And this pipe, which I don't really think did anything, has a whole bunch of holes in it to allow aeration, because I didn't turn this at all. I made a pile, I put some wood chips down, added some alfalfa, wood chips, alfalfa, and then forgot about it. And now it's great. This is good compost. And maybe you don't like the idea of having a pile and you want something with a little bit more structure. Well, right here I have a metal ring just made out of some fencing, 2 posts that are kind of holding it up, but you see it's all floppy. This is because I moved it from another location. And when I first built this, I was putting in food scraps and also adding some browns like paper, wood chips in it, and made some really good compost with just a super simple ring. But right now it has a whole bunch of leaves in it. Leaves that have been sitting and breaking down into what you'd call leaf mold. But look at that. I didn't do anything here. Didn't add any nitrogen source. I just let these leaves sit and break down into some really nice compost. Now with the wood chips and the leaves, because I wasn't adding a whole bunch of food scraps, didn't really have to worry about any critters getting in there. And I've got a lot of land and I'm not really in the city, so I don't really have to worry about that as much. Maybe my composting feeds the fat raccoon that lives in my yard. That's fine. But if you live in a situation where you are worried about that, you can get a plastic trash can or a large Rubbermaid tote, drill some holes for drainage because you don't want it to get too wet, and you can use that as a composter. I did this when I lived in an apartment and had a big tote out on my balcony. Or you can buy one of those pre-made ones, a tumbler. My dad had one growing up. I think he still has one. Made some really good compost. One of the bin style ones with a lid, and you can just put stuff in there and just let it go. Now, yes, turning it more is going to help it. It's going to aerate it, but you can let it sit. You can let it sit and it'll break down. It'll be slower, but as long as you add a little moisture, make sure that it's not super dry. You add greens and browns. You don't have to worry about necessarily the ratio. Just, try to be somewhat aware of it. You'll be good to go. Now let me show you my system that I've been using that I don't currently love because it's a little janky and I'm going to be fixing it, but let me show you what I'm working with right now. Right now I have this compost setup that is made of pallets that I got for free. This is a 2-bay compost setup. When I originally conceived of it, I wanted a 3-bay compost setup, with the idea being that I would put fresh stuff in bay 1, be turning it over, and then as it matured, it would go into bay 2, continue turning it over, and then by the time it made its way to bay 3, it would be fully finished compost. But because I'm making a video about lazy composting, this doesn't really happen. I neglect it a lot. There's a lot of new stuff that we've cleared out of the garden here, a lot of food scraps in here, but I'm going to deconstruct this, and as I deconstruct it, I'm going to tell you some things that to think about in addition about composting that I haven't touched on yet, and then we'll see how this has turned out with me largely neglecting it, and as I said, feeding a very fat raccoon in the process. So as I said, for compost to break down most efficiently, it should reach a temperature between 130 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit. This is hot enough to kill many weed seeds and pathogens, but most backyard compost piles won't consistently maintain those temperatures unless they're very actively managed. So if you're worried about weed seeds, it's best to avoid adding them unless you're confident your pile is heating up. And you can get a thermometer to measure that, but we're talking about lazy composting here. Now, if you're going to make a bay system like I have here and think about turning your compost, how often should you turn it? If you want quicker results, turning it once a week is ideal. But for lazy composting, you can turn it once a month or not even at all, and it'll still break down. And maybe you don't know what you should be adding to compost. Rather than what you should add, let's talk about what you should not add to compost. You shouldn't add meat, dairy, or oily foods. You shouldn't add diseased plants because they're going to spread those diseases in your garden if the temperature doesn't get hot enough. You shouldn't add pet waste because it contains harmful bacteria. And then if you're adding paper, do not add any glossy or treated paper. This contains chemicals that you don't want in your soil. If you're composting casually, just stick to fruit and veggie scraps, leaves, wood chips, coffee grounds, and eggshells, and you'll be good to go. Okay, you want to see what compost looks like if you absolutely ignore it? Let me show you. Now, I removed all the stuff that was sitting on top that had yet to break down, but once you get down in here, this is the best stuff yet that I've shown on this video. This right here. Better than the stuff I showed at the very beginning, which is compost that I ordered in by the truckload when I was starting my gardens. With time and neglect, you can get some beautiful compost. Now, right now with this compost pile, I'm probably going to take all the stuff that's broken down and move it over into one bay. That'll be the stuff I'll use this year. All the stuff that was not broken down, I'll put back in, maybe pile some wood chips, maybe some of this good stuff on top of it so we can start breaking down. When I started taking this apart, or when I set out to take this apart and making this video, I was thinking that I was going to totally change up this setup, which I might still. I'm always indecisive, and I love just changing things around and making a really nice, beautiful, beautiful looking compost setup. But, you know, aesthetics aside of my cobbled together, not leveled pallets here with some little scrap pieces of wire tacked up that aren't doing a dang thing to keep out my fat raccoon. This is some great looking compost, so probably don't need to change a thing. What would you do differently with this compost pile? Do you have anything that I didn't talk about that you think is important for other people to know about composting? Do you compost? Let's talk about compost in the comments section. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. My name is Tyler Lloyd. If you want more videos about living a happier, healthier, more sustainable life, gardening, nature, and all things in between, maybe consider subscribing. Until next time, I wish you the very best. See you later. Bye. Oh, some beautiful, beautiful compost. Where'd my pitchfork go? Oh, pitchfork. Oh, it's so luscious. It is so luscious. Oh, there's a little pocket of stuff. This is why you turn your compost. This is why you turn your compost.